The first reading is taken from Mark's Gospel, chapter 9, verses 2 to 9. And this is round about page 57 on the church Bibles. The Transfiguration. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter, James and John, and led them up a high mountain, where they were alone. As they looked on, a change came over Jesus, and his clothes became shining white, whiter than anything the world could wash them. Then the 3 disciples saw Elijah and Moses talking with Jesus. Peter spoke up and said to Jesus, "Teacher, how good it is that we are here. We'll make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He and the others were so frightened that he did not know what to say. Then a cloud appeared and covered them with its shadow, and a voice came from the cloud, "This is my own dear son. Listen to him." They took a quick look round, but did not see anyone else, only Jesus was with them. As they came down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, "Don't tell anyone what you have seen until the Son of Man has risen from death." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. I bet they wonder what they're doing, where they're going, and what's going on. Why has Jesus chosen just 3 of them to go with him? We may not think too much about going up a mountain, well, until it becomes something we need to do with sticks. But we go walking for pleasure, many of us. That didn't happen in the time of Jesus. They walked out of necessity. They didn't go climbing mountains just for the sake of it. Why was Jesus leaving behind a fruitful ministry down in the valley of teaching and healing and doing wonderful signs of God's presence? The transfiguration of Jesus doesn't change the circumstances of anyone involved for the better. It doesn't restore a situation of loss or pain. It doesn't provide nourishment or refreshment for anyone. So why go off a mountain? Why the transfiguration at all, when there's so much that could be going on down on the plains or the valleys of Galilee? Well, first of all, this mountain walk is purposeful, it's intentional, it's no accident. Jesus has chosen the time, the place, and his companions. Mountains are places of encounter with God in Scripture and with other spiritual beings. Moses enters thick cloud on Mount Sinai and was given the 10 Commandments. Elijah confronted the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, and then hid on Mount Sinai, where he met God in the sheer silence of a mountain cave. Jesus, if you remember, had been taken to the top of a mountain during a period of intense temptation, when Satan said, "I will give you all the kingdoms of the world if you will bow down and worship me." We will sometimes speak about mountaintop experiences to mean something rather special. That's a deeply spiritual event. So Jesus is heading up a mountain with the intention of communing in some way with God. And it happens. Jesus is transfigured before their eyes, before the eyes of 3 disciples. His appearance changes. He looks different, all that whiteness and dazzling light, the cloud and the voice from within it. All this transport the disciples and us to another world. It's a world outside time, bringing people together from different centuries, a communion of saints, if you like. It's a world of the glorious living, not of the dead. For those ancient heroes of Israel, Moses and Elijah, are seen present with Jesus. And the 3 disciples, Peter, James, and John, are witnesses to a remarkable vision. Why those 3? Well, perhaps because they are the future leaders of the community Jesus will leave behind when he enters his glory forever. Those three see Jesus in a new light. They have a new perception of him on the mountain. They've seen him perform signs that have made them marvel down below, and Peter has even declared Jesus to be the Messiah only a week previously. But here they see Jesus bearing the glory of God. Having seen him as a remarkable man through his words and deeds in the valley, now they see him as one who bridges earth and heaven, the temporal and the eternal. The glory of Jesus, they see, will be veiled again when they come down off the mountain, but they will treasure the memory of what they've seen and experienced, even if they don't talk about it until after Jesus is raised from death. The glory of God rests with Jesus, not only on the mountaintop, but before and after the mountaintop experience, all through his sufferings. The glory of God rests with Jesus, though it's hidden from the eyes of the world. So the story tells us that the glory of God is with Jesus at all times of his life, even if it's not seen in the same way and with the same power until he's risen from death. What's the disciples' reaction? Terror. Fear and terror, yes, because they've not experienced anything like it before. But also, I think worship. I think worship is one of their reactions too. Peter offers to make 3 shelters for the 3 divine, heavenly figures of Elijah, Moses, and Jesus. Some say, well, it's because he wanted them to stay for longer. Could be true, but I also think it's a sign of offering. It's something he could do, something he wanted to present, if you like, to the 3 figures as an act of worship. And here's the first piece then of our mission action plan. It's to do with worship. It's about offering the best that we possibly can to God. And as Jesus intentionally led the disciples away from their preoccupations in the valley below, so we commit ourselves to turning aside frequently and regularly in order to meet with God and to worship in the company of others. And we try to bring others with us, as Jesus led others up the mountain where they would see him transfigured and bow in worship, so we try to bring others with us here to worship. So the question for all of us is, how much of a priority is coming to worship Sunday by Sunday against all the other things that we could be doing? We should be turning aside for worship. You're doing this morning, but how much is it a pattern for you in your lives?
And the reading is from Mark chapter 9, and I'm picking up at verse 14. And it talks about Jesus and the 3 disciples who have been up the mountain, when it says, when they joined the rest of the disciples, they saw a large crowd round them, and some teachers of the law arguing with them. When the people saw Jesus, they were greatly surprised and ran to him and greeted him. Jesus asked his disciples, "What are you arguing with them about?" A man in the crowd answered, "Teacher, I brought my son to you because he has an evil spirit in him and cannot talk. Whenever the spirit attacks him, it throws him to the ground, and he foams at the mouth, grits his teeth, and becomes stiff all over. I asked your disciples to drive the spirit out, but they could not." Jesus said to them, "How unbelieving you people are! How long must I stay with you? How long do I have to put up with you? Bring the boy to me." They brought him to Jesus. As soon as the spirit saw Jesus, it threw the boy into a fit, so that he fell on the ground and rolled round, foaming at the mouth. "How long has he been like this?" Jesus asked the father. "Ever since he was a child," he replied. Many times the evil spirit has tried to kill him by throwing him in the fire or into water. Have pity on us and help us if you possibly can." "Yes," said Jesus, "if you yourself can. Everything is possible for the person who has faith." The father at once cried out, "I do have faith, but not enough. Help me to have more." Jesus noticed that the crowd was closing in on them, so he gave the command to the evil spirit. "Deaf and dumb spirit," he said, "I order you to come out of the boy and never go into him again." The spirit screamed, threw the boy into a bad fit, and came out. The boy looked like a corpse, and everyone said, "He is dead." But Jesus took the boy by the hand and helped him to rise, and he stood up. After Jesus had gone indoors, his disciples asked him privately, "Why couldn't we drive the spirit out?" "Only prayer can drive this kind out," he answered. "Nothing else can." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Well, it's a bit different down in the valley below, on the mountaintop, isn't it? This amazing scene at the top of the mountain, Jesus transfigured, his appearance glorified. They come down the mountain and they see a dispute, an argument going on between the other disciples and a crowd that are gathered. From the worship of the glory of Jesus to the arguments of fallible human beings. Starting point here is not Jesus. It's not Jesus taking initiative to lead his disciples up the mountain. It's a man whose son is seriously ill. Now, with the medical knowledge we have, many people today would attribute the boy's sickness to epilepsy. The boy appears to suffer from fits. However, the people at the time attribute the boy's condition to an evil spirit. And Jesus looks upon the boy in the same way. It's an open question whether we regard Jesus' attitude as one we should adopt, or whether he was limited to a particular view of sickness and health in the world by being born at a certain time in history. The boy's father is not only very distressed by his son's condition, he's also deeply, deeply disappointed. "Teacher, I brought my son to you. I asked your disciples to drive the spirit out, but they could not." The father had come with high hopes, but these had been dashed. He was probably on the point of taking his son elsewhere for help, but the arrival of Jesus causes him to shout out once more in a further bid for the healing of his son. So that's the situation of a disappointed father, a dispute going on about perhaps what to do. Was this a failure of faith? Or was there in any way also a failure of pastoral care? Jesus' response to the situation he faces is multi-leveled. It's not all cozy and comforting, it's challenging and provocative too. He challenges the faith of his disciples, and he challenges the Father's faith too. And then he confronts the evil evidence in the boy's sickness and makes him whole. He brings the uncontrollable, unpredictable seizures of the boy under his control. When asked by his disciples why they've been unable to do the same, Jesus points to the need for prayer, the efficacy of prayer. Well, what's that got to do with the church today? What's it got to do with the Mission Action Plan? Well, let's think about this story as being recounted after the sufferings and resurrection of Jesus. So it's told not just as a record of Jesus' life and ministry, but a story for the church. It's a story to strengthen and guide the church. So let's see the group of disciples approached by the Father as a picture of the church. Here's someone in need has come to church, then come to that group, but received a disappointing response. whatever the disciples have said or done, they haven't addressed or been able to deal with the heart of the problem. Proper pastoral care has been lacking. Prayer does not seem to have been at the centre of their response or even been much a part of it. And the person feels let down, they're likely to go elsewhere in search of the support that they want. In contrast, the pastoral care offered by Jesus is both robust and compassionate, challenging and prayerful. He's not overwhelmed by the terrible afflictions suffered by the boy. He strikes at the spiritual heart by speaking of the need for faith among his followers, the church, faith in the church, and faith in the one seeking help. And he strikes at the heart of the sickness by praying for the boy's restoration. Jesus takes charge. He challenges, confronts, comforts, prays, and heals. Let's pick up another jigsaw piece from our map, and that is better pastoral care. We need to take note of and learn from the disappointments people sometimes express concerning the church. Maybe nobody's bothered in time of difficulty. Maybe nobody's asked the right questions. Nobody's offered practical help or prayer. Part of our map is that we will seek to stop people drifting away from church with a sense of letdown. And at the same time, we'll welcome all who come to us, no matter what it is that prompts them. Whatever faith they have, we will seek to enrich and develop. What gifts they offer, we'll seek to nurture. What needs they have, we'll seek to help. Two more jigsaw pieces from our map that I want to draw out from the narrative, and it will be easy to miss them. The first of these has to do with learning and growing of the disciples. You probably spotted that during their mountaintop experience, the disciples heard the voice from a cloud that descended upon them all. This voice said, "This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him." Listen to him. Now think about that as the church. The story told again to the church after the resurrection. Listen to him. Listen to the apostles' teaching. Listen carefully to what you hear in church. We could take it as, say, listen to the sermons. Be prepared to be tested afterwards. No. But then also there's learning that takes place down in the valley. Questions and answers. In that dispute, in that argument, there are points of learning for the church, for the disciples, through, I was going to say banging heads together, but that's not really what I mean, but through talking things out, by meeting together. And actually later at the very end of the story, Jesus takes the church, he takes his disciples into a private place, a room or house, and they have a further discussion with him. So maybe that's a picture for us of discovering more about faith in small groups, such as our growth groups. So learning is another part of our jigsaw. And that happens, sometimes it happens when we're challenged at work or by a neighbour. And we think, what am I going to say, Lord? And we say something and then we think about it afterwards. And we think, oh yes, next time I'll say this. Or maybe I could offer a booklet or something to read or just have another conversation. I'll take that a little bit further. But we learn sometimes through engaging our faith in the public arena. We learn about our faith when we try to develop faith in others. Like the man came with some faith, didn't he, to Jesus? But he said, Lord, I haven't enough. Give me more or teach me more. Well, maybe that's an attitude that we see in others. Maybe it's an attitude that we should acknowledge in ourselves. There's a lot for us to learn. There's another bit of our jigsaw coming up here. As the disciples were coming down off the mountain, they were obviously keen to tell the story. They were discussing it with Jesus on the way down, and Jesus said, don't tell them. don't tell any other people what you've just seen until after the Son of Man has been raised from death. They were there. They wanted to tell the story. Can you imagine? I mean, why wouldn't you? You've had such a fantastic experience. They wanted to tell it, but Jesus puts a hold on it until after the resurrection. There were other things Jesus had to do before the story got out. But he implies that the disciples would be able to share the story once his earthly life was over and he'd been raised to glory. There would be a time when they should tell the story, as they have written it down for us, and we can tell it to succeeding generations. The encounter they had with Jesus in glory on the mountain was not intended to remain a secret just for the initiated. The glory of Jesus was not meant to be confined within the hearts and minds of a select few. What had become known to the few was to be shared with many, but later. Well, we live in that later period now, after Easter. So the gospel of Jesus is not just to be celebrated within our four walls, but to be made known as widely as possible. And one part of our jigsaw for our map that we picked out really is publicity. So that people know what we stand for in this church, and people know they're welcome to come. And what we do in this church and the events we put on may give us opportunities of explaining the faith more clearly. So this is what our new map looks like, putting the jigsaw together. Worship, pastoral care, learning and publicity. We're still keeping our sort of overarching vision of following Jesus, being people following Jesus, whether it's going up a mountain or whether it's coming down the mountain and being involved in the fray of everyday life, and sharing his blessings wherever we go, whatever we do. Very specifically now, just briefly, I want to talk about those four elements. Flourishing worship is what we're aiming for, the best that we can do. And we're going to be setting up a worship planning group. We're going to give it a trial. Our first meeting is on March the 9th to ensure quality and variety in our worship. And if you feel you could contribute to that, you want to be part of that, it doesn't mean that you're going to be in the music group or standing up the front here, but if you have ideas about how to develop our worship, then you'll be very welcome to come along and speak to me about that. And we want to review our service structure and styles. Some of you will know we've already started that with a survey of the 8 o'clock congregation. Look out for a review of what we do at this time as well on a Sunday. And we also want to consider the place of children in church, but especially at communion. I've spoken to the Dawson advisor for children about that, and we want to look for a time when we can have a forum and a discussion about children and communion. So flourishing worship, that's what we want to aim for. On the pastoral care front, there are pictures of the lunch club and a baptism service. We want to coordinate a network, rather better than we do at the moment. A network of people who will perhaps make a phone call, send a card, occasionally make a visit. We're not talking about making regular visits to people. Largely it might be about sending an email. But all of us will need to be more alert to those who normally sit around us in church and think, I've not seen that person for a while. Who are they and where they've gone? And speak to me, or we're particularly asking if Peggy Frisbee, Peggy's offered to help coordinate this sort of network. So we've got a few names there of people who could be in a network of people, those who will just make a contact with those who seem to drift a little bit from church. And you can join that network as well. Then we want to review how we welcome parents, particularly parents with children, young children. We've got them in church this morning. What can we offer to support them and befriend and enable them to come to church and join in the worship and learning that happens here more easily? So we're looking perhaps to have a pool of, just a small pool of people who are willing to sit with those parents with young children, maybe accompany them into the room at the back of church there, perhaps have a drink there with them during the service, talk to them about their lives and how they're coping with their children, and just encourage them, really. So some individuals who can move into what we call the tot spot room, if necessary, and be alongside parents with children there. And there we also have highlighted improved follow-up to baptisms as something to do as well, making further contact more readily. So what about learning together? Well, this is to encourage deeper discipleship, and we are aiming to promote better and coordinate better our growth groups, these are midweek groups, and also we want to create some opportunities to address contemporary issues, challenging issues, those that come up in the media, those that perhaps are talked about at work. What's the church's view, what's a Christian view on three-parent families, for instance, on end-of-life issues, on gender questions and so on. So we want to look at and we'll probably invite people in from outside to help us look at those questions. We might disagree, but that's okay. It'll be a forum, it'll be a way of just understanding what we think we have to learn from God about those issues. And then in way of publicity, we really would love to have somebody who's got an eye and a keenness to overhaul our publicity at all levels. We are aiming to deliver some free copies of Church Magazine around the parish, just a certain number each month, and maybe ways you can help with that. We want to make a difference in the neighbourhood by staging some activities that will make people notice that this is the church doing something practical in the area. And we want to continue putting on events here that will draw people in to our buildings as a springboard, really, for more direct evangelistic events. So there we are, worship, pastoral care, learning and publicity. You'll all be given a piece of yellow paper with those a little bit more explanation on as you leave. The jigsaw pieces will be on there. And you're invited to reflect really on how you can participate and contribute. But there is one pressing concern for us. I call it age concern, right? And that we are all getting older. We're not as agile or as fit as we used to be, or some of us are anyway. But also, actually, our average age is increasing in church at the moment because of a decline in the number of families with children and young people who come to church. So our average age is going up. So there is a real pressing concern to try and address the decline in work with children and young people and support families so that they feel comfortable and want to come, children are happy, and so on. So how are we going to address age concern? Well, we've already spoken about this, about praying more, seeking advice, identifying potential new leaders, and offering training and support. There we have the basic outline of our map, following Jesus and sharing his blessings. His prayer, say we're going to begin next Sunday. We've had a couple of times meeting on Sunday. Earlier, we prayed for youth work particularly, but we want to develop that and broaden the topics. What else do we need to do apart from prayer? Well, I think we need to encourage each other to step out and test different potential. Could you be good at doing that? Have you tried exercising a gift in this area? Maybe, with somebody alongside you, you could be very good at this, but you just haven't felt confident to do it. So we need to develop encouragement of each other, really. And I think the other thing I want to say is actually we also need to review our giving to the church, our giving to God's work through the church, not giving to the church, giving to God's work through the church. Because at the moment, our activities in church are a little bit subsidized by the rents that come in from the hall. But we spent quite a lot of maintenance on the hall in last year, so we haven't got that subsidy. And really, we shouldn't be relying on the halls to pay for what we want to do in church here. and to extend the ministry of Christ in the neighbourhood, we should be financing that ourselves. And we talked about this 3 or 4 years, maybe longer ago than that. And many of you responded very generously. But I think many of us have forgotten. And whatever we raised our giving to, our financial contribution to, at that point, it's probably stayed at that level for many of us. I just want to encourage you to review that and actually think, well, I'm in a different position now from what I was 4 or 5 years ago when I last considered it. You may have to give less, fair enough, but also some of you may be able to give more. And so I just want to encourage us to think about prayer, about how we speak to each other, of coming alongside each other, encouraging one another, and also how we give to support God's work through this church. I think that's probably gone off the air. Finished. So let's just take a moment to reflect on what I've been saying, to think about that story of the Transfiguration. We're going to come back to that in our prayers and offer ourselves, one another, to God for the future of this church. Heavenly Father, we thank you for drawing us together as a community of faith. Increase our faith and trust in you for our future life together and for what you can do through us and among us, and how you can reach every generation with the news of Jesus, how you can bring new hope and new strength to those who are struggling. Speak to each one of us about the part we can play as disciples of Jesus, following him and seeking to share his blessings. For we ask it in his name.